To this point in this series, most of what we have said applies to conversation that is going well. But what about when conversation takes a sharp left turn and before you know it, maybe completely unexpectedly, you find yourself in an intense disagreement? These are often the hardest conversations, and in our divided, polarized, angry culture, the idea of disagreeing well often seems impossible. I mean, what would that even look like? We struggle to even conceive of healthy, constructive disagreement. But as Christians, disagreeing well is not something we can just give up on or opt out of. And quite the opposite. Jesus commissions us specifically to go to those we disagree with and to lovingly try to persuade them of the truth of who God is and what He's done for them. And let's also not forget how Jesus treated us when we were in disagreement with Him, when we were His enemies, opposed to Him in the starkest terms. He did not distance Himself from us. He did not give up on us, no. He drew near to us and stopped at nothing in the pursuit of reconciliation. So what would that look like in our lives? What would it look like to follow Jesus into disagreeing well? Let's get practical. When we find ourselves intensely disagreeing, what actually needs to happen? Like, what do we need to do? What is the actual process that needs to occur in our heads and our hearts between the moment when we hear and feel the intense disagreement and then something actually constructive coming out of our mouths? Well, how did Jesus approach this? Let's start there. I think of when the Pharisees' disciples asked Jesus the culturally charged question, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Now, if I were Jesus, I would have been so annoyed. Seriously? I'm the God of the universe here to reveal to you the eternal truths of life, and that's the question that you have for me? Taxes? Really? And the text says it wasn't even a sincere question. They were trying to trap him. But Jesus gets beyond the frustration and responds in the most remarkable way. Give me a coin. Whose image is on it? Caesar's. Well, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what is God's. The text says they were amazed at his words and they walked away. They should have stayed. They should have stayed and they should have asked, well, what is God's? And we can't speak for Jesus, but if you follow the logic of the conversation, several people have pointed out that Jesus' likely response would have been, well, whose image is on you? And here's what I find so convicting about this passage. Should we pay taxes to Caesar? All I hear is a frustrating, insincere cultural landmine of a question about taxes. But Jesus immediately heard a question about belongingness. To whom does something belong? Whose image is on this coin? Now you know to whom it belongs. Whose image is on you? Jesus gets from the question of culture to the truth of the gospel. And I've come to refer to this as a Genesis 1, Romans 1 approach to disagreement. When someone is disagreeing with me, the first thing I do is remind myself of two passages of Scripture. First, Genesis 1:26, let us make humankind in our image. The person standing in front of me, no matter how strongly I disagree with them, is created in the image of God. Therefore, there is good in them. And then Romans 1:19. It's an amazing passage because Paul is speaking about unbelievers, and yet he says, for what is known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. The preceding verse says that this knowledge may be suppressed, but nevertheless there is some sense in which even unbelievers have knowledge of God. So Genesis 1 and Romans 1 remind me whenever I am looking into the eyes of someone I disagree with, there is still good in front of me, there is still truth in front of me, so let me find the remnant of good and use it to build a bridge back to goodness itself. Let me find the remnant of truth and use it to build a bridge back to truth itself. What does that look like in our lives? How can we apply Jesus' approach today, even to sensitive topics that lead to the most intense disagreements. Take the topic of transgenderism, one of today's most culturally charged conversations. Imagine that a friend or a family member or a colleague opens up to you and says something along these lines. I was born biologically male, but I feel I am in a body I should not be in. I know I am a woman, and I want to undergo gender reassignment surgery so that I can have a new body that reflects who I really am. What does Christianity have to say to someone like me? Now, sadly, most Christians have no idea where to start when someone says something like this to them. And the instinct for many is to tense up and get defensive and immediately focus on whatever we see as wrong in what this person has said. But as Christians, is there anything in this person's statement that we can identify as a remnant of good or truth? I find the beginning of 2 Corinthians 5 incredibly helpful in answering that question. Listen to the first 5 verses of that chapter through the lens of what it has to say to a person who is experiencing gender dysphoria. Speaking about our physical bodies, Paul says this, "For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven not built by human hands. Meanwhile, we groan, longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling. For while we are in this tent, we groan and we are burdened, because we do not wish to be unclothed, but to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling. Now the one who has fashioned us for this very purpose is God, who has given us the Spirit as a deposit, guaranteeing what is to come." Now, as a Christian, can I relate to someone not being fully satisfied with their current body? You bet I can. We groan and are burdened in our mortal bodies. I'm well into my 40s now, and I've got a 3 and a 5-year-old who think I'm a jungle gym. My back already aches every night when I lie down to go to sleep. As a Christian, can I relate to a person who is longing for a different body? You bet I can. There's no way I want to be in this aging, corruptible body for all eternity. I long for that redeemed body, that imperishable body, that one that's never going to know death or mourning or crying or pain. And then the promise of God in this passage, a new body, yes, but not built by human hands. The freedom is that I don't need to exhaust myself trying to resolve these tensions on my own, taking matters into my own hands without any assurance of how things will work out. Rather, the new body that awaits me will be fashioned by God and therefore guaranteed. And one more point of deep connection here. Is there any sense in which Jesus can relate to this person's experience? Is there any sense in which Jesus can relate to the experience of there being a tension of some sort between the fullness of who one is and the body that one is confined to for a time? Absolutely. In Jesus, the infinite and incorruptible God of the universe took on a finite, corruptible body. Who can relate to this person's experience more intensely than Jesus himself? That's a point Sam Alberry highlights, and I just find it amazing how directly our ancient scriptures speak thousands of years later to the most pressing questions of the 21st century. Find what's good. Find what's true. Build a bridge. I'm not saying this is the only biblical approach to disagreement. There are definitely times when Jesus takes a more aggressive approach, especially when dealing with the powerful or the proud. But I do think this Genesis 1, Romans 1 approach is one biblical approach to disagreement, and what I love about it is the way that it challenges and subverts the destructive models of disagreement that we see every time we glance at the news. No one in our culture is trying to find good and truth in the people they disagree with. No one is trying to build a bridge. No, we want to annihilate all the bridges so that the bad guys can't cross over and infect my family and my values and my business and my way of life. We want to rip apart the views we disagree with in 3 seconds flat and then have an aha, mic drop moment that proves how right we are and how wrong everyone else is. But the problem with that approach is that when you drop the mic, you forfeit the right to be heard. And even if you wind up winning the argument, you will almost definitely lose the person. Let me share one more example of this Genesis 1, Romans 1 approach of how we can disagree well, even amid intense disagreement, refusing to compromise on grace or truth. Many people find themselves deeply disagreeing with cancel culture, another of our most culturally charged conversations. And you might summarize cancel culture as follows. 3 statements. We are offended by everything, we forgive nothing, and therefore we cancel everyone. And that's frustrating. It's frustrating because it's at odds with the gospel. It's frustrating because it creates an ultimatum between being known and being loved. And yet, if we look a little deeper and remind ourselves of Genesis 1 and Romans 1, there is actually a surprising remnant of truth even in this cultural narrative. Let me reword each of these statements just very slightly. First, we are more offensive than we think. Yeah, you know what? When you put it that way, as a Christian, I can find some truth in that statement. Second, without God, forgiveness is not possible. Now, cancel culture says forgiveness is not possible, but of course the assumption of secular culture is that there is no God. So the statement is really, without God, forgiveness is not possible. And you know what? Again, as a Christian, I can get behind that. And therefore, what needs to happen? Someone needs to be canceled, which is really a way of saying what? Amy or Ewing makes the point that when someone says they want someone canceled, they really want them silenced forever. They want them to cease to exist. What they really want is for them to die. We are more offensive than we think. Without God, forgiveness is not possible, and therefore, someone needs to die. If we are looking for it, there is actually a significant remnant of truth in cancel culture. But what's missing in this equation? What's missing is the fact that someone did die. Someone was canceled. The gospel redeems this cultural narrative from bad news to good news. It literally flips the narrative on its head. Because someone did die, forgiveness is possible despite our great offense. When we apply a Genesis 1, Romans 1 approach to cancel culture, we say, you're right that I'm an offensive sinner. You're right that I don't deserve forgiveness. You're right that death is the only just penalty. Now let me show you the one person who took that penalty, making forgiveness possible, even for a sinner like me. And so, as we seek to disagree well in today's culture, I commend to you a bridge-building approach. Maybe take some time right now to study how Jesus beautifully took this approach with the Samaritan woman in John 4, or how Paul took this approach when disagreeing with the Epicureans and the Stoics in Athens in Acts 17. And then ask yourself, in what disagreement in my life do I only see what's wrong and bad, and need to ask God for the grace to start seeing the remnants of good and truth? Just as God did when he looked at us, and despite everything we had wrong, and all the ways we were in disagreement with him, he saw the good, and drew near, and did everything he possibly could to build a bridge.